Good evening. My name is Kelly Schmidt, and I'm the treasurer for the state of North Dakota. It is my pleasure to have spent the day today with retired General David Petraeus. David and I have been out in the western portion of North Dakota where we have shared with him the challenges that we've been facing to help make our nation and our world an energy independent country so that you and your fellow officers and enlisted folks never have to go over there again in order to fight for the oil that we all need. I want to thank you, General, for taking the time this evening to share your knowledge and your skills and the things that all these men and women are going to have the opportunity to learn. And David Spry, thank you for putting it all together. You know, when we put this originally together, this was an important part of it because I know the sacrifices that you have all made. I'm a Navy mom, and from the very bottom of my heart, I want to thank you and the families that support you for what you do for our nation to take care of the things that we so many times take for granted. So, thank you. With that, I will turn it over to your David, General Spry.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming out this evening for this very special occasion. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here as we address what I consider to be a very, very important subject in all of our lives, and that is leadership, and leadership at all levels. And Kelly, thank you especially for bringing General Petraeus to the state, to the great state of North Dakota. I understand you had a wonderful afternoon in Williston, and we appreciate very much what you've done for us, Kelly. I should mention, she mentioned she's a Navy mom. 2 of her 4 sons have served in the Navy, a daughter-in-law and a brother. And you have 4 grandsons too, right? 4 grandsons. And they're all going to join the North Dakota National Guard, right?
That's not my stuff, that's not my stuff.
We'll see if we only had control over what our children do, but that's another story. It's really my great pleasure and honor this evening to introduce someone to you, quite frankly, someone who many of you have served with in both Iraq and Afghanistan. And this evening, as I was preparing for this evening, thinking about, what would be the best way to introduce General Petraeus. And the thought occurred to me that when you think back to our nation's wars, we always associate a general officer or 2 with a particular war because of the difference that they've made. You think back to the Gulf War, and you think to Desert Storm, Desert Shield. General Schwarzkopf comes to mind. You think back to Vietnam. General Westmoreland comes to mind. And I think that as years go by, people will think back to the global war on terror. And General Petraeus will come to mind because of what he did in both Iraq and Afghanistan, and what he also did in terms of developing our leaders for the nations, or for our military, and developing the counterinsurgency doctrine that proved to be so successful in the last few years in Iraq and of course in Afghanistan. But I think what's also important to recognize is the fact that he has served his nation as a military soldier for more than 37 years. And during that military career, he served in the Cold War in Europe, served in Central America, Haiti, Bosnia, Kuwait, Iraq, and Afghanistan. And in the decade that followed the 9/11 attack, he was deployed nearly 7 years, culminating his career with 6 straight commands, 5 of which were in combat. He first, after 9/11, commanded the 101st Airborne Division during the fight to Baghdad in 2003, and throughout the first year in Iraq, during which the division was noted for having achieved a unique degree of success through a comprehensive counterinsurgency approach. He returned to Iraq in June of 2004, having left only a few months earlier, to establish and lead both the Multinational Security Transition Command Iraq and the NATO Training Mission Iraq, completing that tour in September of 2005. General Petraeus is most widely known for his roles in the subsequent years. On returning to the United States following his second tour in Iraq, he oversaw significant improvements in the United States Army's preparation of leaders and units for deployment to Iraq and Afghanistan, including guiding the development of the Army Marine Corps Field Manual on Counterinsurgency. He then returned to Iraq to command the surge and guide the implementation of the Counterinsurgency Manual's concepts. During his 19.5 months at the helm of the multinational force Iraq, violence was reduced by 90%, Iraqi forces were reformed and expanded, and the transition of tasks to Iraqi forces was commenced. After returning from Iraq in the fall of 2008, General Petraeus took command of the United States Central Command, overseeing the operation of all United States forces in the Middle East and Central and South Asia. In early July 2010, General Petraeus deployed again, this time to command the NATO International Security Assistance Force, ISAF, and U.S. forces in Afghanistan. During the subsequent year, the momentum of the Taliban was halted, development of the Afghan security forces was accelerated, and transition of tasks to Afghan forces was begun, all while preventing the reestablishment of the al-Qaeda sanctuaries that existed in Afghanistan at the time of the 9/11 attacks. So subsequent to his retirement from the military, after 37 years, he then became the director of the CIA. And it's my great pleasure and honor this evening to welcome to our stage General David Petraeus. Sir?
Thank you. Come on up. Well, thanks for that kind introduction. Thanks, Kelly, for the kind invitation out here. This all came about because I happened to speak to the State Treasurers Association when they were gathered in New York City some months back, and I've had a keen interest in what was going on here, as I've explained a couple times today, dating back, in fact, to when I was first the director of the CIA, and we kept getting asked what the price of Brent crude oil would be after the next round of sanctions in Iran. And so we became sort of minor league oil experts. We cataloged demand in the system and supply, and we kept seeing the number of barrels produced in the U.S. going up, and we said, what's going on with that? And they said, look at the new Texas, which is, of course, North Dakota, so developed a real interest in how that came about in terms of the technologies and so forth, and then seeing how far that was going to go, and then starting to grasp the geopolitical implications of it. So it's really great to be able to come up here to see that for myself. But when you added in this opportunity, I decided this is a trip that we had to take. I tried to coincide. We thought that the weather would be awesome. We knew that this was the beginning.
I've already apologized.
We knew that this was the beginning, and I quote, for the severe summer weather awareness week, which in typical North Dakota fashion, you ushered in with 3 inches of snow here in the capital. But it really is wonderful. You know, you all are my tribe. And when you take the uniform off, it's like taking off your identity or something. Obviously, you are always still a part of that organization. It's always a part of you. But I can tell you it's always a privilege to come back. So thanks for that. Thanks, more importantly, for the great leadership that you've provided to this state as the treasurer, for the tremendous work you've done in that regard. I think the only treasurer in America who actually returns money every year to the Treasury from her own budget, setting a wonderful example for the rest of the state governor. And then thanks to your AG, to General Spry. None of us try to pronounce his last name, of course. And for the terrific leadership you've demonstrated here. I mean, gosh, you've been leading here since before the start of the surge in Iraq, by my calculations. And my spies tell me, and remember I used to do intelligence, that you are highly respected and almost loved here as a figure in North Dakota. So it's well, you know, sources and methods don't always come out right. But look, this is an awesome state. It is a state that, although small in population, I am told has had more people raise their right hand and volunteer to wear our nation's uniform per capita than any other state in the Union. I know that it has sustained tough losses and sacrificed a great deal during the wars of the post-9/11 period. And I know a lot of you, how many, just out of curiosity, did serve in Iraq or Afghanistan or the Philippines? My gosh, just take a look around. In fact, why don't you just stand up? Thank you all so much for what you have done. You know, I often talk about how what you all have been part of, how this great generation of volunteers in the post-9/11 period in particular has come to deservedly be given the title of America's new greatest generation. I believed in that when I first heard it, and actually it came from Tom Brokaw, who of course wrote the book, The Greatest Generation, about the World War II generation that won a war and then rebuilt a nation here. And he was with us in early 2003 when I was privileged to command the great 101st Airborne Division. You're all supposed to say air assault. We'll work on that a little bit. And he saw the myriad tasks that our troopers were doing. I mean, it was just unbelievable. You all know who were over there. We were doing a lot more than just chasing bad guys, although we did a lot of that too. And he said, you know, as he's getting on the helicopter and the blades are turning and he shouts into my ear, he said, you know, that generation from World War II, that was the greatest generation, but what I've seen here today surely is the new greatest generation. You all have been part of that. I know you're all proud, quietly proud part of that. And I just want you to know how much I appreciate personally, having been privileged more than any other American to command America's sons and daughters in these wars, how much I appreciate what you did. And it's great to be here with you this evening. So what we're going to do, we're going to have a conversation. He's going to interrogate me. No enhanced interrogation techniques, I hope. No, he's going to ask questions or leading statements or poke me in the eye intellectually or whatever else it might be. We'll do that for, say, 15, 20, 25 minutes or so, and then what we want to do is open it up to you. Now, here's the deal. This is not optional. I hope you're all getting credit for a drill weekend or a drill year or something like this. But if you stay awake during this, and the cameras are roaming, so okay, you know, but if you stay awake during this, but I will call on you actually. So this is again, and if you're called on, you have to please tell us who you are, stand up and so everybody can hear you, and then ask a question or make a statement or do something thought-provoking, and then we'll try to respond to that. But so again, Dave, it's great to have another Dave. This is the Dave duo here tonight.
Dave squared, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, my first question is, can you spell Sprynczynatyk?
No, I can't. Well, actually, you know, the letters are so small to fit on the name tag. I have to get my reading glasses out here, but yeah, no,
The trick, very simply, is every fourth letter is a Y.
Every fourth letter is a Y. By God, you're right. Reminds me of when I used to say that, yeah, I'm sure glad that I got hit with that M16 round over the A in Petraeus instead of the A in Army, but that's another story.
Well, sir, before I ask the next question,
Yeah.
I just want to mention that we have you broadcast across our DCO network.
Okay, we have to destroy the tape afterwards, though. This will not be on the
we have other locations in the
morning
state
news.
Listening and watching.
Well, good to see you all out there. Or here you are, know that you're out there.
As I mentioned at the onset, you know, our primary focus tonight is leadership, but I know we have a lot of other questions in mind too. I'm going to start with a pretty simple question.
Yep.
Let's set the stage. You are in the process of applying for a position in the North Dakota National Guard.
Yep.
Maybe as the Adjutant General.
Yep.
And
it's a great entry-level job.
Anyone can do it. It's been proven.
I used to say director of the CIA was a pretty good entry-level job too.
But the question I pose to you very simply is, what's your concept and style of leadership that you bring to this position?
Well, General, thank you for asking that question. If you will tell me the style of leadership that is required for each individual who will report to me and for the organization I'll be privileged to lead collectively, then I'll tell you what my style of leadership will be. And in all honesty, that's how I've answered that. And believe it or not, I actually wrote down here, I didn't know he was going to ask the question, leadership style. I think it is a hugely important point to recognize that your leadership style needs to vary depending on the individual. that you're trying to motivate. You know, remember the old Army recruiting commercial, be all that you can be. What you're trying to do is create conditions, a context, a leadership style that will enable him or her to be all that he or she can be. And you're trying to do the same for an organization collectively. So the leadership style that I used as a romp and stomp and air assault infantry battalion commander or an airborne brigade commander, that was a very different leadership style from the leadership style that I exercised as a coalition commander or say as the director of the CIA or any number of the other positions where the span is greater, the population is much more diverse, in some cases, of course, including not just Americans, not just men and women, but also, in fact, large numbers of civilians. I mean, it's little known fact that not only did we surge soldiers into Iraq, but we also surged contractors, because my idea of how to get the most out of every soldier that we were allocated was to make sure that the soldiers were only, or sailors, airmen, and marine, were only engaged in tasks that could not be done by contractors. Because if we could do them by contractors, we wanted the soldiers to be outside the wire. So we ended up with more than 165,000 contractors on the ground, in addition to 165,000 US troopers. And that was going great until a certain senator from the great state of Missouri found out about it, and so I had to answer a few questions, but that was the least of the questions, so that was not a big deal. But leadership style, again, take that to heart. You all know it as a statement of the obvious, but you know, that's what 4-star generals get paid to state, is the obvious. I don't know about 2 stars. You only get to do that once a year.
Yeah. Well, when we talk about leadership and leaders, you know, one of the things that we pride ourselves is we make it clear that everyone in our organization is a leader.
Yes.
Some obviously have more responsibility
Yep.
than others.
Yeah.
But is there a particular leadership value that you think is critical, and it may vary throughout one's
I think
career?
it does vary. Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, it's an important point you make, that you're not a leader just because you have a signature block that includes the title commander or leader or command sergeant major in the non-commissioned officer leadership ranks. Leaders are people who others take their lead from, who others are inspired by, take an example from. And so I think you should never discount the importance that each of you can play in the life of another fellow human being. I used to, in fact, when I would give the in-brief for all the new soldiers in the 101st Airborne Division, I used to talk about how each soldier in a given position at a given point in time, in any one of the skills that we had, and I'd say, you tell me what's your skill, and this one said, I'm a Kiowa Warrior maintenance person. And I said, well, I'll remind you of the time that, we'd lost all the Kiowa Warrior maintenance people except for one. I mean, this is the only person who is keeping our light attack helicopters still in the air. You can do that for every single one. You can especially do it for medics. And I can tell you that the army of one that is most important to you, if you've been shot or broken your pelvis skydiving, as I did, trying to resemble a lawn dart, the most important person in your life, bar none, is that medic peering down into your eyes and then trying to get an IV going. So again, everybody really does matter, and every person with any degree of rank whatsoever, it matters even more because, again, more people take their lead from that person.
Personally, I've often said that a leader is one who helps others see the future. Whoever is around you, whoever you're working with.
Yeah. Well, that's that vision thing. And I mean, you asked about the one call, and I think it does vary. I think at the very, very top, it is about the ability to get the big ideas right. It's about judgment on issues that really matter when you're talking about strategy or operational campaign planning or what have you. Let's remember that the surge in Iraq that mattered most was not the surge of forces. The fact is we had about 145,000 US troops on the ground. We added, originally it was going to be 20, it ended up 25 or 30 when I got done with it. But the surge that really mattered was the surge of ideas. It was the change in approach and strategy. It was recognizing that the human terrain is a decisive terrain and we have to secure and serve the people, and we can only do that by living with the people. So we reversed the whole movement to big bases and put people back in neighborhoods, 77 additional locations in Baghdad alone. Some of you probably helped fight for those locations because just about every establishment of a new joint security station or combat outpost required a fight. We put our troopers right where the sectarian violence was the highest. We had to separate them, calm it down, then you start clearing neighborhoods. And then you had to clear and hold, not clear and leave. We were doing Operation Together Forward 1 and 2 in 2006 before the surge, and we'd do well for 2 or 3 weeks and then hand it off to Iraqi troopers who were not prepared to take the task. So you had to hold it. I actually stopped transition, which again, every single one of these, by the way, was against what Prime Minister Maliki wanted to do, frankly, and what was agreed on doing back in as late as November of that previous year. We started the surge in early February. And again, it went on. And then a huge one was that you cannot kill or capture your way out of an industrial strength insurgency, which is what we faced. That was an insurgency on steroids. And the only way you can deal with that is by reconciling with as many of those as possible who are willing, with certain incentives, to become part of the solution instead of a continuing part of the problem. And I had subordinate commanders that, hey, sir, you know, we can't sit down with these guys. They've got our blood on their hands. And I said, this is the way these things end, fellas. Now, that meant, though, that there were irreconcilables as well, those that were not willing to be part of the solution. And we redoubled our efforts against them with our Special Mission Unit forces, our Joint Special Operations Command, counter-terrorist forces, and others, and really took enormous hunks out of the senior leadership of al-Qaeda in Iraq, of the Shia militia extremists in Iraq, and of a variety of other senior insurgent group leaders. But it's about big ideas. And again, if you don't get the big ideas right at the strategic level, you're in a very, very tough position. You not only have to get them right, you then obviously have to communicate them effectively through the rank and breadth and depth of the organization. You have to oversee their implementation. That takes a whole series of tasks and a battle rhythm and metrics and getting out to see it yourself, walk patrols, get shot at periodically and so forth. And then you have to figure out how you have to change the big ideas, what lessons are out there that are only learned when you actually do change those big ideas that are captured in the mission statement, in the base order of your plan, and then in all of your different annexes for how you carry that out. So I think that's a pretty big quality. Along the way, obviously, you want folks that have a work ethic, that have integrity, that have a variety of other qualities. Actually, physical and mental toughness is hugely important. All those who've been in combat in particular know that you're right on sort of the edge of your physical capability over time. I know that I certainly was, especially during the more than a year and a half of the surge. If you got a call in the middle of the night, you just really felt it the next day because you were right at the edge, and you didn't have weekends to catch up on your sleep or anything like that because you're going 7/24.
Sir, I've read where you've been referred to as a relentless mentor.
Yeah.
From your perception, what does that mean, and how should we as leaders address mentorship?
Well, I always felt that one of the joys of leadership was that you could help other people. One of the main ways that you can do that is by mentoring. But I mean, I did it a whole host of other ways. I always had a little factory of people producing letters of recommendation and all the rest of that, sending out letters, communicating with people. But to help others that really want to excel and are driven and have great aptitude and ability, I think is really a special opportunity. And you can do that, especially, I think, the higher you go, the more those opportunities are there. Being relentless about it means that you really take it seriously and you really give a lot of yourself to it. I used to actually give my email address to every captain in these groups of company commanders. We would always get company commanders together in combat so that I could talk to them. They are senior enough to really have some perspective. Most of them had already had a tour in combat as a lieutenant, but they're not so senior that every casualty is just a name, not a face. For them, every casualty is someone they know personally, and they take that very, very seriously, as we all do. But I think it's particularly emotional at that level. And they don't hesitate to take the gloves off with even a 4-star commander, and I wanted them to take the gloves off. And I said, look, if you guys are out here, you are the ones that are writing the very first letter that goes home to a family. We all did all the way up the chain of command. But I said, yours has real insights in them. We want to keep these men and women alive. So if there's ever some issue that is really gnawing at you that has not been resolved by the chain of command, you owe it to your troopers to get on email, and you can email me directly. You can info all your chain of command. I don't care. I'll get it, and we'll do what we can to take care of it. And there were quite a few folks that emailed me. It was amazing how many mothers in America had my email as well, and I used to get a lot of cards and letters from them as well. I had one time that she wrote to me. This is in the very early days, and you know, the fight to Baghdad, there weren't a lot of creature comforts during that for anybody that was with it. I was counting up the other day. I think we went 40 days before I had the first sort of shower. And so anyway, one mother wrote me and said, and we all lost weight. Didn't matter how much you weighed when you started, you lost weight by the time that first phase was over. And his mother wrote to me and said, I'm really worried. My son only weighed 145 pounds to begin with. Now he's lost 15 or 20 more. You know, we don't seem to be able to get through to him that he needs. So could you check on him? I said, you know, I'd be happy to do that. But let me just tell you, now if I check on your son, you know, I'm a division commander, and between me and him, I got a command sergeant major to go all the way down the command sergeant major channels. They'll be happy to give him lots of love and attention. There's a brigade. He has a brigade commander. He has a battalion commander. He has a company commander. He has a platoon leader. So when I express my interest in him, it's likely to be amplified a fair amount, and you probably need to be prepared for that. So she emailed me back and said, you know, on second thought, perhaps I'll. I actually found him finally, and very quietly I said, hey, eat more breakfast.
But my next question, maybe you just answered it.
Sure.
What advice would you give to young company commanders as they move through their career and aspire to higher levels of leadership?
Well, you know, one bit of advice is, and it sounds incredibly obvious again, but it is to really master the tasks of your current position. A lot of folks think that, geez, you know, civilian graduate school, no, that's really complex, or this is really complex, or high finance, or whatever nuclear or surgery or something like that. The truth is that our tasks at every level are extraordinarily complex if you actually master them. I mean, if you really get into indirect fire support of small units and master the fuse settings and the ranges and the different projectiles and the calls for fire and the different ways of adjusting and all the rest of this, I mean, this is complex stuff. And the truth is we don't always master it. And so, in fact, when I was a battalion commander, I would have all the new company commanders and lieutenants report into me, and I would give them a tactical test. And they all flunked it. I mean, these are individuals right out of their basic course as lieutenants or their advanced or career course as captains. And invariably, they did not pass it. And I would express grave concern as I was reviewing this, and I'd be wiping my brow, and my goodness, you're going to lead America's sons. That was an infantry unit in those days. And you clearly have not mastered your profession, and yet you want me to put you in command of these great young men. So I'd say, okay, here's another test. Take this home tonight. You got to really study the manual this time and have it in my inbox before I get in the morning. And they'd say, well, what time do you arrive in the morning? I say, well, it varies from day to day. So, but it better be in here before that to add a little bit more to the pressure. But, really, truly mastering the profession is not easy. And if you really get into the details of it, and then how you translate and communicate tasks to soldiers, something as simple as a rate of fire for a machine gun is not so simple. First of all, you got to memorize it. Rapid fire is 100 to 200 rounds per minute. Sustained rate is higher. And so forth. So you have to understand what that means to a soldier. How many 3 to 5 round bursts is that? So you have to, make it 1001, 1002, 1003. Now, why is this important? Well, because if you have a support by fire position, they're suppressing the enemy, you're going around over here. You want to have them still have ammunition left by the time you arrive on the objective and not run out while you're 50 meters from it. This is important and very challenging. And you can do that for any field, any skill, if you really, truly get into it. And that's what I think is very, very important. It's interesting because I hosted a bunch of West Point superstar cadets the other night for dinner down in New York. They're all getting scholarships and everything else. And, you know, well, sir, which periodical should I subscribe to? Is it Foreign Affairs or Foreign Policy, or should I read the New York Times? I said, you might want to try reading Field Manual 7-7, Infantry Platoon first, because although, you know, we'd love to call on you for your knowledge of international relations, what we really would like to do is have a competent platoon leader as your first focus in life. So it's obviously you want to balance that, and you want people to have an awareness of the world and how it operates in some facility in that regard, and that helps enormously later on in particular. But again, the first focus should be literally what is your job and how to really be professional about it.
Good. My last question before I turn it over to the audience.
Okay, this is the warning now, so
that's right.
The hand of...
But you see, we have a number of family members here.
Yep.
We have children, we have spouses, parents. We've been engaged in the global war on terror for more than a dozen years. Many of our soldiers have deployed more than once.
Yep.
What's the best piece of advice you'd have for our families today, you know, as we continue and look to the future?
Sort of trite again, but, you know, treasure every single day. Again, as was mentioned, you know, it was either a privilege or whatever, but, you know, for the family it was a sacrifice, but I was gone for something like 7 out of the last 10 years that I was in uniform. And so again, you got to, you know, those times when you have together are awful special. I think clearly that the deployment pace, I mean, it's already slowed down dramatically. I think it's going to slow down even further. We will have a residual force in Afghanistan most likely. I certainly hope that that's the case and that it's 10,000 or more, so that the enabling aspect of that for our Afghan partners can be seen to properly. So again, these numbers are way down, but there will still be opportunities. And for those who come in, a lot of you will lead young troopers, young non-commissioned officers, young commissioned officers, who are going to say, oh man, you know, I missed the wars. Sadly, I think that there will be more. And I say it sadly because, you know, everybody wants, I don't know if everybody wants to get in it, but a lot of young men and women certainly want to, if there's something, it's like an emergency medical technician crew. You don't wish for an accident, but by God, if there is one, you want to be there helping out. And I think that's the way most people in uniform feel. I think there will be many more opportunities over the years that lie ahead. I think we're probably not in for a Cold War or peace. It's going to be more of a cold peace, where there will continue to be a need for a lot of different skill sets out there, in addition to the ones that will be in heaviest demand, which will be those of our different special operations forces from the 3 different services in the Marines.
What you just said, I think, is very true. When we, you know, ended our involvement in Iraq, we actually saw a drop off in enlistments, because I know, you know, a lot of young men and women you know, want to join the military, to be engaged, to be a part of, you know, of our nation's defense. And I think as we draw down in the future, we'll probably continue to see some challenges in that regard.
Well, I think, again, there will be lots of opportunity. There will be calls for volunteers for a variety of different, for those who are in various of the reserve components who are doing the summer active training periods, that there will be lots of opportunities, I would think, for those periods to do more than just go to Camp Ripley here or whichever one site you use. I think there will be plenty of those out there. So. Okay, well I'm going to start calling on them now. So now if somebody raises a hand, of course we might be able to recognize that individual, but we don't want anybody to be labeled the spring butt of the year. Yes, Colonel, right there.
Sir, Colonel Dates listing.
Yep. What's with the names in this organization?
Yeah. Bohemian, sorry about that. It's my dad's fault. There's a fellow that I know by the name of Colin Dunn.
Yeah.
And Colin, when he did a strategic planning workshop, referred to a guy named Peaches. Could you give us the background story on that, sir?
I'd be happy to, yeah. Yeah, it took me years to live down that nickname. No, when I was a little kid playing Little League Baseball, 9 years old, went up to the plate for the very first time, and they had some other little kid in the booth announcing for all the parents who were there. And now coming up to bat is David it's not the easiest of names either, Peaches. And so forever after, I was Peaches, and Peaches Petraeus, and you know, at various times it was Peaches Petraeus, the dashing young man of Cornwall soccer, or you know, whatever it might be. And I went to West Point, and 7 miles around the corner of the mountain. It was, you know, I could have commuted to school if they'd let me. So, because we lived literally right around the mountain in the Hudson River Valley. And so one of the girls that I knew from high school was actually working, I think, in the cadet laundry or something like that for her summer job. And she'd put notes in my laundry. And then the upperclassmen got word of that during Beast Barracks, and so they tore my laundry apart and made a big issue of this. And then found out also that there was a nickname of Peaches. And so this was prolonged throughout. So all my classmates, I'm not General Petraeus, I'm not P4, I'm Peaches Petraeus. So there you have it. Never take yourself too seriously. No, that's another good bit of leadership advice. That's right. Right, there's a civilian right here in the black jacket with the glasses. Yeah, please. Yep.
Sir, it's an honor to meet you.
The honor's mine, thanks.
My name is Scott Markovic, Lieutenant Colonel, retired. I guess my question would be about op-tempo.
Yeah.
You know, all these guys here that have served and deployed,
yep.
op-tempo was very high. And I guess I'd like to ask you personally how you would deal with your own op-tempo, finishing up, you know, several tours in
yep.
one theater of operations, thinking you might get a breather, then all of a sudden they say, well, we'd like you to go to this one and see what you can do
yeah.
there. How did you wrap your head around that? Obviously, you're going to salute smartly and say yes, sir, but how did you personally deal with that kind of op-tempo?
Well, you know, I guess you have to respond. I think you do. You almost have an obligation to respond, you know, that it's a privilege to serve. One of the times, of course, I mean, it was a complete surprise. I literally did go. You know, I was the boss of the guy in Afghanistan, and then I became the guy in Afghanistan when General McChrystal sadly resigned. I say sadly because he's doing a magnificent job, and obviously he slipped up with a reporter. But so I went to the White House. I was in Washington because I was his commander, the commander of Central Command. We had the monthly, I guess it was, meeting on Afghanistan and Pakistan. Both countries were in my area of responsibility. So I literally went to the White House for a meeting. I knew that Stan was meeting with the president earlier in the day, but I've been talking to the Secretary of Defense and the chairman, and our hope was, maybe we were overly hopeful, but that, you know, he'd just get taken to the woodshed and sent back to Afghanistan, told to refrain from talking to reporters for the next year or so. And instead, I was sitting down in the office of one of the assistants to the president. Guy stuck his head in and said, "Anybody seen General Petraeus?" And I said, "Yep." So he said, "They want you up in the Oval." So I went up. Everybody else is coming out, you know, the whole national security team, and they're all sort of avoiding eye contact. And I thought, this is a little odd, you know. And I mean, look, I sensed that this is a possibility. But, you know, you go in and you sit down, you're the only guy in the Oval Office. It is a fairly rare occurrence to begin with. And no small talk, and the president looked at me and said, "I'm asking you as your president and commander-in-chief to go to Afghanistan and take command of the NATO forces there." And I mean, so I wanted to say, what am I supposed to say? No? Come on now, you know. So I said, you know, the only answer is obviously is yes. And the previous time, which was unexpected, was when I came back as a two-star. I'd not been back very long. I was actually at the icebreaker for a mandatory general officer training course. I never even got to my first beer, and I got a phone call that said, "Get on the plane to next plane to Iraq. They want you to do an assessment." I said, "I've only been back for 6 weeks, but okay." So we went over, did a couple weeks, and I came back, reported to the Secretary of Defense. Said, "Great, you know, your reward for this great assessment is now you can go over and implement it." So come out of command early and get over there in about a month or so. So we did that. But you know, again, I think it's the greatest of privilege to do that, but it's also the greatest of sacrifice for your family. We also moved our son 3 times in 4 years of high school, and I was not there at all for his senior year. That was when I went back as a 3-star. In fact, I never came home. I never came home the first year at all. We didn't have the mid-tour leave program until late in the day, and we decided to let the troopers take advantage of that rather than the leaders. And then a second time, I didn't get home for the first year. I was there for 15.5 months. I made it home for his graduation, and that was the extent of Dad's participation in his high school. Now, not a bad lad. You know, he was first in his class. He was a National Merit Scholarship winner, an AP scholar, and he went to MIT, where he joined ROTC on his own, surprised us, called us up, said, hey, I've just joined ROTC. I said, call your mother. He said, I already did. She said to call you. I said, okay, well, congratulations. And he's serving now. He's in the Ranger Regiment. He's in Special Operations. He was in Afghanistan the first 6 months that I was a commander. That was not something we planned. That was very uncomfortable because he had my name tag on. You know, then obviously the family name tag. I had intended to have him wear other name tags, but he didn't want to do that. He thought it was, you know, a little much. Well, now I'm the guy in theater, and you know, you have these incidents of insider folks taking out some of our troopers, so it was very uncomfortable. I never went to see him once while he was actually in combat. And he was outside the wire every day. He was just an airborne infantry platoon leader, getting shot at on a regular basis. But you know, good lad, and you know, thank God. And frankly, he had a wife who deserved better than I was. But you know, by God, she really did a magnificent job shouldering the not just the mom, but the Mrs. Dad tasks as well over the years. So, how about right here, the captain right there, female captain?
Hi, sir. Captain Sandy Wade.
Yep. What do you do?
Full-time, I work as a staff accountant at the PFO.
Fantastic. Great.
And on the MDay side, I'm the 68 HHD Troop Commander.
Congratulations. Remember, it's not optional. No pressure. I can help you stall.
That's good.
What's your single biggest challenge as a troop commander? Single biggest challenge?
The training.
Not enough hours in the training week or year.
As HHD, it's different than
oh yes, of course.
Regular company level.
Yep.
So
yep.
companies have medals and
yep.
collective tasks.
Yep.
And at HHD, we mainly support the rest
sure.
of the troop command units.
Yep.
So training is the most difficult part.
Sure it is, yeah, it always has been. And it's a little bit like coalition command, because all these darn majors think they actually own their troopers, but the truth is, you're their commander, by God. So yeah, no, that takes persuasion as much as leadership. So God bless you for that. That's really is that's why the headquarters company or troop commanders are always very highly thought of folks, by the way. So I think that's a compliment to you, that you could probably get along well with others who are senior to you and get them to do what you want them to do. Because remember, leadership in its purest of forms, it's not a form that I've practiced much, but is the imposition of your will on an organization. So don't forget that every now and then. Impose that will. How about right across the aisle, right there, and then we'll hand it up behind, then it'll go up over there. Yep.
Sir, Lieutenant Colonel Paul Helton, 1st and 112th Aviation Battalion Commander. My question is
how many hours do you have? God, you got a star and a wreath?
I do, sir. Just
awesome.
Short of 4,000.
Whew.
We just found out today that Fort Rucker, all of the contractors and maintenance personnel went on strike.
Really?
And so my question is, how fast does that kind of an issue make it through the Army and up to someone, say, at a 4-star level? And what kind of emphasis do they have on fixing that type of problem?
Wow, I hadn't heard that, first of all. An issue like that will rocket up. And in the day of email and internet and 24-hour news and everything else, that's the kind of issue that'll be a red star cluster over the Pentagon very, very quickly. I actually liked the aspect of what the internet provides to you. You can flatten the information chain. And I think it's an important distinction that you have to be comfortable as a commander with that information hitting everybody very rapidly, as opposed to being passed up the chain of command. If you do that, you're wasting time. You can't outthink the enemy. You can't react fast enough. Having said that, the decision-making process, that needs to go down through the chain of command, and that has to be retained. You can't have commanders reaching around subordinate commanders or issuing something all the way straight down. And yet that has to work very, very quickly as well. In this case, I am sure that both the civilian side of the Army leadership, because this is really probably more on sort of the business side, on the Secretary of the Army, and it's probably the Assistant Secretary for that part which does the maintenance and contracts and so forth. That's a big deal, because obviously the training wheels at Fort Rucker are grinding to a halt. It'd be interesting to find out what I'm not sure, obviously I haven't heard what the issue is, if it is pay, if it is hours, if it's safety, if it's with the Army Aviation.
I think was the
That could be. I think the whole medical benefits issue is going to be one that's frankly going to loom larger over the United States. It's an area we have to get control of, frankly, but it's also an area that as you try to get control of it, then folks are going to feel squeezed, or they'll be required to pay a bit more or something like that. So that may well be, I can't imagine what it's hooked to, but I can assure you that that's one that'll be right at the top. And that's again, you can't stop training the Army's aviators.
Absolutely, sir.
And they'll figure that one out pretty quickly. Right there? Yep. There's no short route between 2 points in North Dakota.
Roger that, sir. Good evening, sir. Lieutenant Colonel Jim Olson. I'm the State Training Officer here. My question is that in the news there's been a lot of discussion about the active component, the National Guard, and the size of both of those structures, and really what is the right force mix as we go into the future. As somebody that's had to integrate both of those compos in theater, in OIF and OEF, do you think that this is really about capability, or is it cost? And what recommendations as we go into transformation would you give us as leaders?
I think the biggest quality that I'd try to exhibit would be rationality. These issues become very emotional very quickly. This is not the first time that this has happened. In fact, I was the aide to the Chief of Staff of the Army in the wake of Operation Desert Storm, and that was another period where we were drawing down, and the National Guard was very agitated because they hadn't gotten into the fight, frankly. And remember, they sent 2 brigades, Georgia and South Carolina. I think they went on what turned out to be the longest rotations in the history of the National Training Center. And frankly, it was because they were being held to common standards for deployment, and they couldn't meet those standards because they hadn't really had the sufficient spooling up process that we have really embedded as a whole, the road to deployment for active as well as reserve component units for these wars that we've been fighting. The fact is that by and large, active and reserve components, Guard and reserves, have been generally indistinguishable downrange if the preparation was proper, and particularly so in the second and third tours for individuals and units. There was some distinction, candidly, in first tours in some of the cases, particularly some of the combat units at various points in times, and it varied enormously based on the leadership of the individual company, battalion, and brigade commanders, frankly. I think that it calls for rationality because there has to be realism. You can't delude yourself and say that you are going to be as ready with all the greatest of respect to the citizen soldiers who have deployed so many times and exhibited that same readiness. But over time, that will erode again, and people will be promoted to new jobs in which they will not have had that kind of experience. But if your training consists of 2 weeks a year and 11 or 12 weekends a year, I mean, it is just not comprehensible that that can bring a unit to the same readiness level as it can with active units that are doing the whole yearly training cycle. Now, it varies. There are certainly some skill sets, some units that are using individuals in their uniform capacity and very similar to their civilian capacity, and the difference is not marked at all. So you've got to be, again, rational about that. But when it comes to performing tasks that are not out there in the civilian workforce in any which way, for example, combining the effects of maneuver and fire and air and ground and all the rest of that. I think that's something you just flat have to do and do again and do again and, you know, fail and get better at it and so forth and so on. And so that's where I think you have to have reality intrude on the equation. And there can be, on both sides of this debate, I think, a that gets much too high, much too quickly. And it then gets into almost the lobbying wars on Capitol Hill and everything else. And that's disappointing because I think we've had such a magnificent manifestation of the one army, really the one military approach throughout the wars of the post 9/11 period, to now see it devolve into squabbling over, who gets what at the end of the day. And surely there could be some rational heads behind closed doors that could solve that, because then what happens is then you all have to start picking sides, and then you get caught up in this, and then it just engenders bad feeling, and that's not what we should have after we've all gone to war together. Again, I was privileged to command all components, all services, and hundreds of thousands of civilians on top of all that, and hundreds of thousands of coalition troopers. And frankly, it's the same as with coalition warfare. You have to assess what can each individual country and unit bring to the fight in terms of strengths. Where are there perhaps some shortcomings or gaps? And then you take other elements and you try to plug those gaps or augment, compensate for the shortcomings. And that has to be the way you do it. But unfortunately, this is just ratcheted up very, very quickly, as you've seen. And I don't think that's healthy for the overall sense of, again, this one force that we worked so hard to forge over the number of years. I assume you were around in the wake of the Gulf War. And that was a really, really bitter period. And here we have this great victory, and right away it descends into this sort of back and forth. And we want to avoid that, I think.
I think what you said just a moment ago is very important. The powers to be need to come together and work out a rational solution. And unfortunately, from the Adjutant's General perspective, some of the decisions were made unilaterally without full input and discussion. And that really is the right answer to how we move forward.
You know, there is a leadership lesson in that, and it's called the big tent concept. Whenever you have an opportunity, get everybody inside the tent for the decision-making process. And you know what? I won't get into the vulgar portion of that about you want them inside the tent doing something rather than outside the tent doing something. And if you have them inside the tent, at the very least, folks will feel that they have at least had an opportunity to offer their 2 cents, and at least they have participated in what was the ultimate outcome. On the other hand, if the tent's closed and nobody's allowed to hear what's going on, and all of a sudden a decision issues forth without warning or discussion or back and forth, that's when you get a lack of trust, and that's not what we should have. So, yes, right there.
Sir, Captain Chris Elijah, Provost Marshal for the 141 MEB. My question is, since the drawdown in Iraq, we've seen kind of a shift in strategy from COIN to more conventional fighting, and just what's your thoughts on a proper mix of conventional fighting strategy versus COIN?
Well, first of all, you should remember that counterinsurgency operations, by definition and by our doctrinal manuals, including in the counterinsurgency field manual, counterinsurgency operations, like all operations, are some mix of offensive operations, sort of conventional, if you will, defensive operations, and stability operations. The stability being the reconstruction and all the other elements of a campaign that is required to secure and serve the people. Obviously, you have much more stability in the conduct of a counterinsurgency campaign than you do of a major combat operations phase of a campaign, say the fight to Baghdad or something like that. And I gave a speech on this last summer over in the Tower of London, of all places, and I explained that I felt very strongly that the counterinsurgency era is not over. And the reason the counterinsurgency era is not over is because the insurgency era is not over. And as long as there are insurgencies out there, there will be at least some cases in which we care about the outcome. And so we'll help those countries. Obviously, you always want to do it with a light footprint. You want to avoid the kind of enormous commitment that we ultimately had to make in Iraq and Afghanistan. Obviously, there's no one that knows more about the sacrifices we made, I think, than I, other than perhaps the families that sustained them themselves. And so you don't want to end up in something like that if you can avoid it. So the light footprint is always the right answer, except when it's an insufficient answer, and then you have a really tough decision on your hand. But you know, we did light footprint as a commander of Central Command. We did it in Yemen with a degree of success. We were doing it in Somalia. We did it in Pakistan until some unfortunate activities there forced them to pull our special forces out of their units as they were conducting a campaign against their Taliban. We've done it successfully in the Philippines, Colombia, and a variety of other places. Again, the challenge is when that's not enough, when the host nation is not sufficient to do virtually anything on its own, and you are the ones that have to reestablish control and then try to stand them back up and get them going again. But I think again, we should maintain our expertise, our knowledge of counterinsurgency campaigns, but recognize that there's really tough fighting that goes on. I don't know when you were in Iraq or Afghanistan, I saw your combat patch, but I mean, as somebody who was in the Battle of Sadr City is going to scoff at the idea that we weren't doing conventional force operations. I mean, we killed 77 indirect fire teams of the enemy in about a 3-week period using every means known to man. I mean, we had so much stuff stacked above Sadr City with towers with optics, drones with optics, drones that were armed, close air support, even high-flying intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets, and then a variety of stuff ringing Sadr City as well as we made our forays in and then eventually took it back. I mean, that was very high-intensity conflict. We had tanks in it, we had Bradleys in it, we had everything from, again, the biggest systems all the way down to Special Operations Forces snipers. So the entire mix was employed there. And again, I don't think there's been a brigade commander in our history who ever had the assets committed that particular commander, Colonel Hurt, had committed in that fight. It's the same is true in the Battle of Fallujah, Battle of Ramadi, the Battle of Bakuba, the Battle of Triangle of Death. I mean, we dropped 600,000 pounds of bombs in a single morning in a single tactical operation south of Baghdad. And so again, I'm very proud to have been the guy that gave more emphasis, if you will, to the stability side of it, the so-called thinking man's war and all that. But I'm also pretty proud that when the requirement was there, that we didn't hesitate to drop a ton of bombs, many tons of bombs on bad guys' heads as well. So the key is the mix. You've got to have that mix. And again, you don't want to use force that is not precise. You don't want to have civilians killed or injured. You don't want to have collateral damage. Clearly, you want to use only that which is necessary, that's proportional, as the saying is. But you do need to use it when you need to use it. So, do we have a question over here somewhere, did I see? I'm sorry, yep, right here, and then there's one back over there.
Sir, Colonel Bob Fody, I'm the Line Component Commander here in North Dakota.
Duty first.
There you go.
Turn around and show them that big red one patch there.
Soon to be promoted.
Promotable.
Just waiting, yes, promoted.
Really? That's the equivalent of being struck by lightning, you know, when that happens. So, congratulations. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
You know, a few weeks ago, during the change of command, there was an individual who actually came up from Texas that talked to me about Team Red, White, and Blue.
Yeah. Yep.
And, you know, during his discussion with me, he actually got an additional duty assignment on a weekend, which he was really not too pleased with. However, when he actually got there, there was 500 plus individuals that were involved in this organization, and he had one heck of a time. He told me to go out and Google Red, White, and Blue, which I have done, and I've noticed that you're out there and actually have talked to this organization.
Yep.
You know, when I'm not in uniform, I'm out trying to work in those veterans organizations, and we're always asking the question, how do we get more people to participate? And I guess I'm looking for, from you, what would the benefits be to try to start a chapter of Red, White, and Blue here in the state of North Dakota?
When I hosted those 6 cadets the other night, the guy who actually facilitated that and drove some of the cadets down from West Point, was the founder, Major Mike Irwin, founder of Team Red, White, and Blue. He, I think, is so committed to this that although he has a tremendous career going, and by the way, I was mentoring him before he founded it. He founded it at Michigan, University of Michigan. In fact, I spoke there at their annual event this past January, I guess it was. A great time to go to Michigan. It's sort of like coming here in spring. But Team Red, White, and Blue is a great organization, and I'd be delighted to see you start up a chapter. The genesis for this organization was the recognition that when veterans come home, take the uniform off, there's something missing. And what's missing, frankly, are those who were on their left and right, who raised their hand together, swore an oath, and were willing to serve a cause larger than self, even if it entailed a degree of personal sacrifice, sometimes the ultimate sacrifice. And I mean, it's an awesome, as you know, there's an awesome bond there. I'd say that it's the brotherhood of the close fight, but I'd acknowledge there are women in the brotherhood of the close fight, as we all recognize. And so Mike Irwin saw this and decided to just get some veterans together. I guess it was up in Michigan where he was. And he decided that instead of getting veterans together, with all due respect to some organizations that we have that have brick and mortar, they tend to come together to drink and smoke, or at least that's what they end up doing. And, you know, it's fine. It's an individual choice, but maybe we could get them to run before they drink, or you know, have a long bike ride before you have a beer. And that's not a bad concept. Actually, what we found was that a number of the veterans that most wanted to get back together with those with whom they'd served before. And it's not those they served in the same squad, it's just those who served, especially if they served downrange together. You get it together around physical activity, and the physical activity helps with some of the occasional emotional issues that everybody, look, every single person in here who's been in war knows that it has changed them in some way. There's no question about it. And you know, we're all changed by that experience. In some cases, you're even more resilient, you're more appreciative of the joys of life, and you know that you still have it, and you make the most of the days that you have, but then there are other issues as well, obviously. So he was trying to help come to grips. This has been the fastest growing veterans organization in America. I'm proud to be associated with it and to support it, and I'll continue to do that. There are a couple of others I support as well, and we try to feed the end result of all of them is we want to get them affiliated with an organization called American Corporate Partners, which uses corporations to provide mentors, again, the importance of mentoring, so that they can mentor individuals who are making the transition from the military workforce to the civilian workforce. But we don't just want them to find a job, we want them to find a career and a vocation. So that, you know, the sergeant with 2 kids and a wife doesn't jump at the first job that walks by the door and then ends up guarding a parking lot from midnight to 8 for the next 20 years of his life, ultimately hating life. We want him to find a career in which there's a degree of fulfillment and all the rest of that, in which people will invest in the individual as that goes along. So I think Team Red, White, and Blue. Do you know him? Do you have his email?
I do have his email.
Okay.
On the web, so
great.
I should be able to get it, and I think that we're going to actually start meeting with an individual.
Info me when you do that. Put me on the CC line, and I'll make sure he won't screw it up anyway. But sure as hell won't if I. So now, look, I know I'm conscious that, you know, although I extol physical fitness and have been known for a bit of a relentless commitment to that over the years, I also am aware, though, that there is a reception that follows, and that I am all that stands between you and a glass of beer or water or wine or whatever your pleasure may be.
Sir, I was just going to make mention.
If we want to go, yeah.
Sitting to Colonel Fode's right is his older brother, who's a Vietnam veteran.
Really?
Oh, okay, Bay of Pigs.
Now that was an interesting operation. Yeah, we won't go into the post-mortem on that one. There were some tough lessons learned by my older. I was not there, thankfully. I was a little young at that time. It would have been a 10-year-old fighter if I'd. But thanks for what you did there, and thanks for what you did along the way, because you were obviously in a tough arena. So we'll do one more question here. I think I saw one more somewhere. There, right over there, please. And And then let me just make a couple of concluding remarks if I could.
Good evening, General Petraeus. It's a pleasure to meet you. I've enjoyed following your career over the years, reading about you. And I have a lot of leadership questions, but there's something else I have to ask you. Iraq 2003, when you had all these National Guard guys coming over, at your level, what was your thoughts of the hillbilly armor and the Guard guys coming over and
We had hillbilly
vehicles?
armor. I would have been.
Some we've always wondered.
I would have been grateful for hillbilly armor. I was in I had the doors off my Humvee for most of the first year. We didn't get any up armored. I think they fielded from south to north or something like that, and we were up in Nainoa province in the north. So I actually did not get an up armored Humvee the entire time I was a division commander. I drove a lot through the streets of Mosul during that time. Now, admittedly, we were doing quite well up there for quite a long period of time until the reconciliation initiative that we had started, and which was so helpful, was not supported in Baghdad, tragically. It was very tragically, and that really unraveled one of the success stories of that first year, and then we really didn't get an industrial strength reconciliation initiative going until later. Look, I think, you had the good and you had the bad. There were some units that came over there that were enormously professional. By the way, some of them were military police. I thought they were terrific. And we had some really challenging military police issues up there. They were attached to one of the best military police units in the whole U.S. Army, that one that's out of Fort Bragg. And then my own battalion, 716th, was over there as well. A lot of those that were in combat support and combat service support, the pilots, by the way, actually generally, in some cases, were better than the pilots we had. I mean, 4,000 hours, you tell me how many people my command pilot, who was, I think, the best pilot in the 101st Airborne Division, which, we went over with 254 helicopters, so that's one of the largest air forces in the world under a single division. We had a lot of pilots and a tremendous amount of power. I don't think we had maybe the one CW5 had 4,000 hours, and he probably was a Vietnam veteran, frankly, from all the way back. So again, there are enormous areas of enormous competence. Then there are some of those, though, in which individuals and units had not had the kind of preparation of a serious road to deployment, because we were scrambling to get units in there, and in some cases even re-rolled them so that you had units that were, say artillery that ended up doing some other function, and that was not good either. It took us a long time, I think, to get the road to deployment right. I would argue that there were enormous deficiencies until we made the last few changes when I was the 3-star out at Fort Leavenworth. I mean, the start of the road to deployment for a brigade going to Iraq, say 8 to 12 months in advance of going, was still a seminar on combat in cities as late as December 2005, instead of a counterinsurgency seminar, in which you'd have some combat in cities, but you'd also have all the other elements of a comprehensive civil military counterinsurgency campaign. So I tended, there were bad active units, there were good active units, there were good and bad U.S. Army Reserve units, and there were good and bad U.S. Army National Guard units. I would say by and large, as a generalization, units were good of all components. And no question that as the wars went on and as the deployments accumulated, that competence was really very common across the board, and you had integration of units left and right in a way that was just seamless. So I didn't think there was a big deal, but I, don't talk to our soldiers about hillbilly armor. I've long waited for the journalists to ask me about that one, and we put hillbilly armor on our stuff. We made our Humvees so overweight that we started having suspension problems. But no, look, our Army was not what it should have been when we went into that thing. Just simple, such as shields just gun shields for our machine gunners who were exposed on the top of these turtleback Humvees, not hard shell, but just turtlebacks, like the one that I rode in. They didn't even have the shields, much less the entire cupola and the overhead cover that we ultimately got, or frankly, the kind of V-shaped hulls that we should have gotten much earlier. When I came back when I was in Iraq as a 3-star, doing the train and equip of Iraqi units, rebuilding their entire ministries of interior and defense and ultimately 1 million men under uniform, I had so much US money, I bought V-shaped hulls for the Iraqis from South Africa and then also from Cadillac Gauge. Those were among the very few V-shaped hulls in the entire theater because we did flat-bottomed Humvees and didn't reinforce the Stryker vehicles initially. We should have done that earlier. When I came back, I asked the Training and Doctrine Command that I was part of as a 3-star to do a test of all the V-shaped hulls, and then we would provide that to the Army headquarters, and maybe that would spur them to do it. It wasn't until Secretary Gates took over as the Secretary of Defense and I was the commander in Iraq and basically raised hell about this that we got the MRAC production line really going. And so we can thank Secretary Gates and all those who rode in an MRAP, and just how many hands rode in an MRAP out of curiosity? I mean, everybody was there in the later years, or the ATV MRAP in Afghanistan. I mean, those were extraordinary vehicles, not invulnerable, but the protection level of those was orders of magnitude higher than the protection levels that we had, even in the flat-bottomed, very heavily armored Humvees that we ultimately got. So there's a lesson for us there. And that is that, you know, make the changes quickly when you see it. Don't delay. Don't be bureaucratic. Beat the system. And it took a forceful Secretary of Defense like Secretary Gates to do that. Same with unmanned aerial vehicles, the proliferation of those. Same with optics on towers. A whole host of other force protection measures. Even the individual kit that we ultimately got. So a conventional soldier really had kit that was about as good as that of a special mission operator, frankly. Very close. And again, a lot of that because of Secretary Gates. So if you were driving in hillbilly armor, you were in good company.
Well, it came a long way in a short time.
Let me wrap this up so, again, we can get on to what's next. You know, as you go through life, it really doesn't matter what your position is. I mean, it can be a really lofty spot like the AG or heck, the commander of the surge, or it can be a variety of other seemingly very important positions. But at a certain point in time, the Groundhog Day syndrome sets in. Regardless, you got to admit it. I mean, it does. And, you know, today is going to be the same as today, which was the same as yesterday. Maybe it's a different congressional delegation or different coalition group meeting you or whatever it is, and it's tough, it's grinding. In combat, there's casualties every single day. I remember people used to ask me, you know, what's it like to command the surge? And I'd say it is the most awesome job in the world on a good day. And we don't have many good days. So even in those positions, this grind, this sets in. And you get to a point you're sort of putting your left foot in front of your right foot and repeating the process. And when that happens, you know, what you want to do is you go on up to altitude and you look down at yourself and say, man, you know, I'm in the Guard or the Reserve, active force, retired. I'm here in this incredible state, you know, North by God, Dakota. We're swimming in oil and natural gas. The Treasurer's got this massive rainy day fund. The opportunities are colossal, and I'm a part of that. And I have raised my right hand, many of you, and sworn an oath to the Constitution. And again, this extraordinary privilege of serving one's nation, and for some who have done it in combat. So really think about that. I mean, the blessings that each and every one of us have are really quite extraordinary. And that is especially true up here. And I'm very grateful again to be able to see what is going on up here, to see the challenges, which are legion, as well as the extraordinary opportunities. And then in particularly thankful for this opportunity to spend some folks with the members of my tribe. So thank you very much. Thanks.